Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session Recording 174. My name is Dani Beaumont and I am a product manager on the Adobe Muse team. I could be joined by some of my colleagues today. There is an engineer, her name is Margie, and she is responsible for implementing Creative Cloud libraries within the application. It's rumored she will join us today, so if I get started in my prezo and you see her in the participant list, you're welcome to welcome her. But if she doesn't come, we'll be just fine. We may have extra time today. Let's see how it goes. So definitely as we're working, if you have questions for me that have nothing to do with Creative Cloud libraries, but have something to do with Adobe Muse and the new responsive release, for example, feel free to put that in the question pod here on the lower left-hand corner, and I will jump out and address them as we work. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And we will get started. Okay, so I have been at Adobe for a long time. Probably many of you that work with Adobe applications have done so for a very long time. When I was hired at Adobe the first time, it was to present and train Illustrator 88, which means it was a long time ago. And through the years, there's always been conversation about this idea of sharing assets across applications. And as a user, it seems incredibly easy. But through the years, I've seen attempts made. And a lot of those attempts have not necessarily succeeded. And I'm just really impressed with Creative Cloud libraries. I think that they do an amazing job of allowing you to share assets across the Adobe Creative Cloud applications. So I just was really impressed enough that I felt like it's worth a jam session to talk about it a little bit more deeply. So before we do that, if you are brand new to Muse, I just want to breeze through some of the places you can go to learn about what's new with Muse or just Muse as a whole. We tend to play around on a site called muse.adobe.com. It was originally built entirely in the beta version of Muse. That's how it got started. And it now has matured into a mix of some back-end Shopify pages that allow us to have data-driven content and then some straight-up Muse content. The landing page of muse.adobe.com is usually, when we release, fully built in Adobe Muse and an opportunity to show off new capabilities. So that is true right now. Towards the bottom of this page, we have kind of a really fun matchup where we gave designers Muse for the first time and allowed them to sort of duel to build out the best site. So I encourage you to check out both of those videos. They're now live on the landing page. But kind of silly stuff aside, this is a great place to learn about what's going on with Muse. So if you're here, you either learned about it through the Facebook page or this upcoming live events area. The nice part about this section is any of the recordings that we've done are usually available on YouTube, on a YouTube channel. So you're welcome to come back to these recordings, skip through the fluffy part, get to the meaty part, or even play it on an iPad or perhaps an iPhone as you work on your computer, because they're on YouTube and it's easy to play alongside with the application. So the events page is a great place to hang. The next presentation I'm looking to do 2 weeks from today will be a deep dive in best practices around really using responsive on common web patterns that we see out there. So looking at web standards for responsive design and actually showing you how either I've figured out how to implement features or many of my colleagues, my peers, specifically from the template and widget providers out there, some of the templates they've built, having learned how to work with the tool. So that should be a great session 2 weeks from now, and you can sign up for that on Facebook or look for it here on this events page. Tutorials page is also a great place to go. It will have any of the latest videos that I've done for quick sort of previews of the product, as well as deeper dive articles and such. We have a series of starter designs. If you're brand new to Muse, a great way to get going is to just grab one of these guys and try to customize it. There are 2 that have been updated to be responsive, Exposure and Kava. These are accessible to you from the welcome screen within Adobe Muse. So clicking there and jumping to this page is, again, a great way to get started. Another terrific place if you're relatively new or if you're new to responsive, which is most of us, is this How to Create a Responsive Website in Muse tutorial. This is usually a labor of love. I've done it 3 times now. I did building your first site in Muse using the Katie's Cafe sample, which is still available, and now using this Pigeon website for responsive design. But this is a nice deep dive. It's 5 different videos, I believe, for this total amount of time, about 65 minutes, where I take you through building out the responsive site. Again, you can skip around those videos. You don't have to watch them in total, but you can have a set of starter assets that you follow along with me. So a really good place to come hang out, and that's a CC Learn tutorial that's out there. I have a quickie that tells you about Creative Cloud libraries. We're going to go deeper into that right now. Do not fear, I promise I know why we're here. But I do want to mention 2 other areas. We have this area of widgets, and they're constantly being updated. This is a terrific space for folks that are in the community that are extending the Muse application. So if you're trying to achieve something, coming in here, if let's say you want to add a blog, you want to add a weather widget, for example, to the bottom of your website, you can search for that here, and it will pretty much run a search across all of the known vendors that are building out widgets for Muse to extend its functionality. Another one that's just fun to hang out is Site of the Day. If you are doing work and you started to play around with responsive, please send your designs to the Site of the Day space. You can come in and submit your own site here, but this is a great way for all of us to learn about what the community is actually doing. We pick about 3 sites a week, and the ones lately, at least 2 of the 3 for the past 2 weeks, have been responsive designs. So also a great place to come and learn how people are implementing the new features, actually using Muse, and some of the widgets in the community. Those are also showcased in these designs. I'm in the middle of working on it, so don't hold me to it, but when you come to the drop-down area here, I've gone in and tagged some of the sites by certain categories. I'll create a tag for responsive in this drop down pretty quickly now that we have some sites there. It's a great way to jump to particular areas. I think I'm only up to the letter C, and it's a big alphabet, so I'm not done yet. But that is also a great way to jump into particular work. Let's say you're doing a restaurant site. There'll be sites that are tagged as good examples of restaurant sites built using the actual Muse tools. Okay, with that upfront information all set, I'm going to swing back and see if I have been joined. I'm going to do a bad thing and jump back to my list real quick of attendees. There's Margie. I knew she'd come. I'm going to promote her as a presenter. We're also joined by Prashant, from our quality engineering group. So both Margie and Prashant are going to be covering chat. It's excellent to have them. And Vadim. Hi, guys. We got great coverage. So there's no harm, absolutely, in the chat. Throw out any questions for the team as I'm presenting, and they will be quick to answer the questions. This is why we call it a jam session. This is a great opportunity for me to learn from them, along with you, about some of the nuances of the application. All right, that was fun. Let's get started. So Creative Cloud libraries, as I mentioned, they've been around for a little while, maybe a year. They've evolved in their functionality. I kind of ignored them for a while, and then when we integrated with Muse, I was so impressed with the functionality. I thought it was really a good thing to show off. So in your world with the Creative Cloud, let's see if I can get away with this a little bit. I'm going to hide everything that I've got open at the moment, which is an awful lot. Actually, let's do this. You'll notice in my control panel here at the top, I have the standard Creative Cloud app that sits here. And there is access to certain elements. So I can come in and see assets, for example, that I may have downloaded from the market, for example, or files that I may have made available in my Creative Cloud folder. So I can access them here, but kind of a more direct way, something I would be more familiar with, is in the Finder of my application. You'll notice here on the Macintosh, I have a Creative Cloud Files folder. And this is a folder that it's a little bit like Dropbox would be a way I would suggest it's comparable to. So content that is here can be used and can be shared with other people through different means. And we're going to look at that a little bit together. We should do that right now. So Chris Kellett of 123 Muse has created a template called Starter. 123 Muse, let me jump out and show you that a little bit because there's value to that. If you jump to 123muse.com, Chris and his brother Dan are both terrific designers and developers. They've got a great sense of the back-end systems. They were sort of born in the world of Business Catalyst back when we worked more closely with that company. And through Business Catalyst, they discovered Muse. The site that you're looking at right here, 123muse.com, is built in Muse as a front end and deeply integrated with Business Catalyst. The guys are just terrific at it, Chris especially. Dan is more of a visual fellow. But what their goal is, their intent is by way of subscription to give you educational content around Muse. And as I mentioned, the widgets that they develop and the Learn content is terrific because they have a great deal of depth in their knowledge of the web and Muse. And Chris is here, as I can see. Once you get him started, you pretty much can't get him to stop, but that's okay. I opened the door, Chris. They've redesigned the site lately to make it work for them more on the back end, but they've also created some nice content. They've been becoming familiar with what is out there for responsive Muse, and they have a starter template that they are offering. If you sign up, it's something you get for free. If not, you can buy it for $19. What I'm going to do as part of this session is share up this starter Muse template from a Creative Cloud library folder that he shared with me to show off some of that sharing capability and also give you a nice treat from the 123 Muse guys for free for attending today. So let's look at how I might do that. What Chris did is what I'm about to do, and he went in and added a folder to his Creative Cloud Files folder. So this is not libraries yet. We're going to get to that, but we're starting with files. So I've got the free starter from 123 Muse. And if I right click on that and bring up the menu, I can come in and view it on the website. And I did that kind of quickly, but you'll notice that there's a little red Creative Cloud icon. That's indicating that it's taking me to that Creative Cloud space. So this is the starter content that Chris shared up with me. It is now in my Creative Cloud folder and something that I can also share. So when it comes to files in the folder, there's advantages here. I'll be really honest. The library feature that I'm going to show you will not contain all of the type of content that I can have in this folder. So Chris gave me a PDF file, for example, that tells you how to use the assets. He also gave me an actual Muse file, .muse. These are in a folder that I can share. The Creative Cloud library will not allow me to drag a full Muse file into that library, which kind of makes sense. The intent of the library is for assets that you use within the application. So this is more of a superset of shareable content. Also, having defined things in folders the way he has, that folder structure is easily reflected in the file directory and not so much in the folder for Creative Cloud libraries. So I want to share this with you guys. I know you think I'm teasing you. I'm going to pull down on share to, let's see if I send link. Okay, so I've decided I want to send link. There are two worlds right now of sharing. One says I want to collaborate. The other one says that I want to basically share. When I collaborate, I can by email invite you to share in a folder with me. Collaborating is interestingly dangerous in that when I share that folder for you, if you're a bad person, you can come in and delete or change anything in our collaboration folder. If I instead send a link, it will, in essence, snapshot the content and allow you to add it to your directory. The downside about sending a link, whether it's from the library or the file folder structure, is that if I make a change, if I send you a link today and you join the folder, and tomorrow I make changes to my source content, you'd have to know to rejoin again to pull down any changes. A little bird on my shoulder mentioned that there's a chance that that feature will be changing, such that when you choose to collaborate, you may be able to collaborate in a way that consumers would not make changes, but would be able to receive changes. So that's kind of a real missing feature with this sharing bit that I would really like. So to be clear right now, I can either give you full access to everything, or I can snapshot the current state and share that for you. with some new functionality coming down the pipe pretty soon. For those of you that are having bad audio, usually it's because your internet connection is not fabulous. If everyone's having bad audio, then maybe it's me. But usually what you unfortunately need to do is probably come back and listen to the YouTube. It's me, you're saying. All right. Let's pause and take a look at this. I'm willing to check. See, this is the problem. Erica says it sounds good, so I know. I'm sorry. I'm going to keep going because in my experience, it really is on the consuming end and not the creating end. But the YouTube recording will be definitely clear because that's a direct pipe without internet between it. I'm going to keep going, guys. Sorry about the quality. Notice that there's a public link here. I'm going to come on in and copy this public link. And I'm just going to put it into chat. I don't need to send it as it says here. It's not required. Notice that I have the ability to come back here and remove the link after I've created it. So I may want to share it for a period of time and then stop sharing it. But I will come in and add that into the chat. Now, if you're watching the YouTube recording, this will be in the notes at the bottom of the page also. So that is one piece of life and a really wonderful gift from the 123 Muse guys. Having spoken about that, now let's look at libraries, because libraries really is the exciting power that I think is amazing when you're using Creative Cloud applications. I'm going to switch over to Photoshop. And let's just say this is the beginning of the story. So quite often designers will begin in Muse and build out their site, and then they'll jump out to Illustrator and Photoshop to sort of look at the layout and the content of the site. The pigeon design that we used for the responsive release of Muse was actually built by someone who was not familiar with Muse. And to be honest, responsive didn't exist because we had to have months of design time and the features weren't quite done at that point. So the designer that I worked with built out full mock-ups, full Photoshop comps for the design. And this is an example of those comps. I have artboards for each of the responsive variations of that pigeon design. And that's a good one that I could work with, but I'm going to grab a different one for a second, and that's a spec page. This is what I believe a little bit more of a common workflow in the world of Muse, and I can jump out on that for a moment. Muse is a layout application, and the idea of laying out a website in Photoshop in its entirety to get sign-off from your client, for example, seems like a ton of wasted effort. I think that using Muse File New from the beginning is a terrific way to build out wireframes, interactive prototypes, show your clients, and build over time. But there still is a need to probably design the look and feel, the specifications of a site, especially if your designer is not going to be building the site within Muse. And that's what happened here. The art director that had built out the pigeon design gave me a specification page in Photoshop that allowed me to understand how the design should manifest in all of its permutations, both dark pages, light pages, images, text, rollovers, and such. So that's what this Photoshop file represents, the pigeon spec PSD file. Now, when I open it up in Photoshop, unless you say don't show it again, you're presented with the current version of Photoshop, a new library from document window. And this allows you to come in and automatically extract all of the elements in this design into a library in one automatic move. Now, as you might expect, or you probably don't expect it yet, but standards are different across applications. And the reason why we all love so many Adobe apps is that they all do certain things uniquely very, very well. So when we talk about sharing assets across all of these applications, sometimes some things can be lost as they move to other applications. A really obvious, sensible example would be when I go from Photoshop into Muse. There's aspects like layer effects, layer styles that Photoshop might have that I don't really need to pay attention to when I'm creating content for the web. I would flatten that out of my content when it moves over. So when you put things in Creative Cloud libraries, if you're using it to work within an application, it's more of a lossless behavior. If you're using it between applications, there may be some things that are lost. And as you experiment with individual applications, you'll get a sense of how the handoff between apps actually works. When I'm in Photoshop right now, Character styles, for example, do not translate from Photoshop over to Muse. We don't have that connection. Now, we have an advantage here, which is Margie is in the call with us now, and she is actively working on enhancing the integration from Creative Cloud libraries to Muse. So with her ear, if there are things that you'd like to see that we put effort into, it's a great time to log those feature requests as I show off what we have today as far as capabilities. Layer styles, for example, is something that only is relevant within Photoshop. So from what I've read, no other application actually would take layer styles and use them. It's just for working within Photoshop from project to project. So I've got that unchecked. I do want the colors to carry over and smart objects to carry over as well. And the way smart objects manifest, if you know Adobe, historically, this has been something that's been around for a long time. But the idea is if I take vector content, let's say an illustration, and I place it in Photoshop, it's placed as a smart object. It doesn't flatten out and become raster like other Photoshop content. It's an object that when double-clicked will open up back in Illustrator and remain in an editable vector form. So if there is Illustrator content placed on this page. So for example, if I look over here, these icons are smart objects from Illustrator. By checking this box and saying move them to the library and replace with links, that keeps that connection even though I'm passing through Photoshop with the original Illustrator application. So when I come in here now, this file is called pigeonspecs.psd, and I can say go ahead and create a new library for me. Now, I'm being a little mean here. I don't have Photoshop expanded in the right way. That happened really fast and it was off screen, so I'm going to go ahead and do it one more time because it happened that fast. So now that that dialog has been dismissed and I'm already here in the application, there's a second way to say, do me a favor, extract from this current project a library. And the way I would do that is here in the CC Library panel. In the lower left-hand corner is a Library from Document button. This will do the same thing I just did that was off screen. So when I click it again, I'll come in and decide what I want to carry over. I'll go ahead and click Create New Library, and it's going to come in and render all of that for me. So it went through and it extracted what it thinks is important here. Now you'll notice my designer was kind of playing around with some interesting things here. I have two different sort of shades of white. I have a pink color that I don't think, yeah, there you go, it's in the form there. But it's extracted all of the colors for me. As I scroll down here, actually bear with me, I'm going to do that one more time. Let's see, let's delete it so I don't get confused. I'm going to close this guy out and open it up one more time. And I'm going to use this approach and actually carry over those smart objects and the regular elements as well. So I've gone in, rendered those library items, and notice that I've got different elements here. I have a PNG file that came directly from Photoshop. I have an Illustrator logo, Behance for example. Down towards the bottom, I not only have Illustrator content, but they're smart objects, which means they're still linked and can be opened back up within Illustrator. So it's gone in and rendered that for me, which is terrific. All I need to do now that I've done that, I can quit out of Photoshop. I don't really need it any longer. And come back into Muse. And let's go ahead and close out this microsite. Here is the starter template that Chris Kellett and 123 Muse have donated that we're going to play with a little bit today. But let's go ahead and go further with the pigeon a little bit. I'm just going to pull down on File to New and create a new project and come on into this new page. And then I'll open up the CC Libraries folder. So I can see in the drop-down I've got that new file called Pigeon Specs. And with it I have all of the colors that were in use. I have the graphics that were there and all of the elements that I need to work with. Now there's some interesting ways you can play with elements here. Color, I would argue, is about halfway to where we want it to be. Kind of tipping my hand for things that Margie is focusing on a little bit. We have the idea of swatches in Muse. I can come in and delete, in essence, all unused swatches, which strips out everything except for a main set of non-color colors here, grays and blacks and such. When I come to CC Libraries, I can come in and create a container, let's say, that I want to work with. And I can click on any of these colors to bring them over. What we're working on, as you might imagine, is the ability to just import those into the swatches panel more directly with Muse. As it stands now, though, having those original colors available is very useful. You'll notice that I'm not sure why this happens. I have the same color a couple times. So once all of the extracted elements have been brought in from Photoshop, you're welcome to come in and just select maybe the redundancy or things that you don't really want. I'm holding the Command key. Pretty positive this will work. And I can now come with those Shift selected in essence or Command selected and hit the Delete key to remove them. So I got rid of the redundancy. And you'll notice from time to time as I'm working, changes, I'll see a little rotating arrow that's indicating that those changes are being uploaded into the cloud. So the cloud instance of this library, or the shared instance if I were to share it with someone as a collaborator, those are being updated seamlessly in the background very easily. You'll also notice when I opened up Muse, I didn't have to refresh, I didn't have to reload in any way. That library had already synchronized in the background for me. I can come in and apply these colors, and then I can come in and bring some of the graphic elements that I'd like to work with. Now, there are different ways you can play with elements, and like I said, I've looked around at some of the tutorials that are out there for CC libraries, and I've gathered some nice tips and tricks that I sure didn't know in the beginning, so I'm going to share some of those. As I work, when I want to bring an element out of the library, there's two ways I can do it. If I right-click to that item, you can see some of those choices. I can place it as a linked item, or I can place it as a copy. If I want it to be linked to the source, I can say place linked. So when I select that, I can now come in and just, let's see if I do that the right way. I can come in and place this file here on my canvas. So as a placed object, what that means is that if I make changes in the root, it will permeate to all linked instances. Another great place to hang out here is to keep an eye on the Assets panel as you work. Because the Assets panel remains within Muse, it'll show you all of the elements that are actively being used within the project. But the new kind of interesting nuance here is that for any of these asset files, notice that there's this little cloud icon. And that's indicating that, let me zoom back out, that's indicating that those files are a Creative Cloud Library item and they're linked in the cloud. They're not a local asset for my local directory. This is fantastic if you're sharing files with other people and you hate when they open up that file, there's missing assets that you have to send separately. That whole complicated workflow with placed content is really simplified with Creative Cloud Libraries. So I've gone in and placed a linked instance. Let's go in and do this with a little bit more. I'm going to come and grab a linked instance of this vector content. I'm trying to use new mouse tools, which is why I keep scrolling badly. I'm still a fool about it. I'm going to come in and do that again. In the second instance, I'm going to place a copy of this element. So this is the copy and this is the linked instance. And if you'll notice here in the Assets panel, if I expand it, I've got those two assets that are available. Now, if I want to come into this guy, let's say I want to go and make changes to the source. Let's exaggerate this just a little bit more. I'm going to grab a second linked instance and place it here. Now, as I'm working, I can come to this object, and here in the Creative Cloud Library panel, I can say that I want to come in and, let's just see, edit it. So I've gone in and I've placed, just to be clear, I've placed two linked versions and one copy version. If I go in and select edit, the Creative Cloud Library knows that that file was originally created in Illustrator. And I could come into this object and do something incredibly simple because I haven't used Illustrator much since Illustrator 88. But if I came in and selected just a bit of this here, and I changed, gave it a fill color, something awful. Okay, I now have a very beautiful filled logo here. If I come in and hit save, or just close this panel out and come back into Muse, ideally the magic happens a little bit. So what I've gone in and done is I made a change to the linked instance of the logo. Now Muse doesn't want to be incredibly disruptive, so if I was working on this project and I closed it, and overnight somebody went and changed that Illustrator Creative Cloud library item. Let's say I've got an Illustrator on staff, they're making changes to the logos. The next time I open up this project, I would be alerted that certain assets had changed. If I'm actively working in the project, what I'll notice is over here, notice in my Assets panel, remember we placed 2 instances of the Illustrator logo that was linked and one that was a copy. I get an indicator here saying that the assets changed since it was imported, and I also get an icon indicating that that has changed. If I right-click here and I say go ahead and update the asset, it will come through and place that new instance of the changed item there. So it is going to check with me. It's going to alert me in the Assets panel that a change happened. I can also see in the Creative Cloud library that that change has happened here. But the other 2 instances that were placed as copies and not linked did not change. So it gives you real flexibility there. You do need to keep track of your content and make sure that when it's shared, collaborated assets, everybody's in sync with everyone else. This is why it's so dangerous to actually collaborate your library with others, because they can come in and change all of your project files. Having said that, I showed you how you can share these files with at a folder level for the Creative Cloud library folders. Let's look at, with the Creative Cloud folders. For Creative Cloud libraries, the share methodology is pretty consistent. If I've gone in and I've built this out in a way that I like, I can come to the flyout panel here in the library and select that I want to share or collaborate. So that same metaphor, right? If I decide that Margie needs to see my assets, I can select collaborate and email her access that we both can jointly work with. If I select a share link, it does have that similar behavior. It's bringing me into the cloud for a moment where I can come in and generate that public link that I then share out with the community. So just for the heck of it, I'm going to come on in and copy this link and put it into chat so that you could see it. And to sort of compare a little bit, the first link I gave you took you to the folder level. The second one will bring you to, it's funny. So there's Creative Cloud libraries. It took you to the folder level, and then the second one will take you to the library level. Okay. Let's see how we're doing. So we've got some of these pieces in place now. Some of the things that I've learned that are pretty interesting. Let's kind of get out of here and go over to Chris's project. Ooh, this is where it's great to have folks like Prashant actually watching when you kind of crash a little bit. So I'm going to swing back into Muse. I made it mad somehow in those gyrations. Good thing it's recorded. I'm not going to bother recovering any changes because we didn't do much. And I will come in and open up the starter file again. Okie doke. So what Chris did is, it's a really nice responsive website. No, the template did not crash, for the record. It was not the template's fault. It might have been, but I can't prove it. What Chris did is he'll tell you this was his foray into responsive. It was an opportunity to really understand some of the new features. And he's got some terrific things going on here. Just to kind of showcase this for a second, there's this nice services page. He's got this great breadcrumb trail. If I come in and pull down on File to preview the page in the browser, the thing that's nice is as Muse has evolved over time, we really have fleshed out a lot of our support for file formats. There was a time where we didn't support SVG. We do that now. And SVG has really evolved. There's some other videos that I've done that talk about enhancements for SVG. I encourage you to check out if you've not done so far. But being able to place SVGs as background images, being able to crop them, being able to place them into galleries or slideshows is a whole lot of fun. In the world of responsive, your goal is always to make things as light and crisp as possible. So as you evolve and learn more about the responsive feature set, the advantage there is I may have multiple breakpoints. I may have a desktop breakpoint, and then I may have navigation for touch-enabled devices like tablets and smartphones. I can place an SVG asset once and scale it within individual breakpoints so that it's optimized for each of those classes of devices, but rely on a single asset. And this is an example of that. Notice I've got my little branding words here, and I've got vector content, SVG, here. As I press the edge of my browser, it's scaling the SVG content in a clean, crisp, high DPI way. Based on the resolution of my monitor, I'm going to get clarity. When I get to a certain point, notice that he's jumping to another breakpoint, and he's scaled that logo back up for a single column structure. And it again can scale back down. He's able to do that all with one asset because it's SVG, it's very light. He's not having to change it per breakpoint more than apply different scaling capabilities. So this is where it's fun to really dissect how he's built out the site. It's a very nice example of how to optimize responsive design using Adobe Muse. So let's say I'm working now in this particular file and I want to kind of start from scratch. So I'd like to create, I've gone in and done some design work. Maybe I had a library that I created from Photoshop to morph it over. And at this point, I want to share content out with my team. I can come to CC Libraries, the panel here, and in the flyout menu, I can create a new library. And I might call this Dani Start, or STARTR, Dani Starter, and I can create it. And there's nothing there right now. So another sort of interesting integration for CC Libraries is Adobe Stock. If as a designer, as you're working, you like to do for position only FPO images, Stock is an incredible repository of still images. I think vector content is evolving. There's also video content that's out there. So I can come in and search is kind of interesting. Yeah, let's go ahead and show how search works a little bit. So when I come into search, notice it says search all libraries. I have nothing in the folder I've just created, but I could choose to search just the stock content. I can search within the current library that I have. So if I have a lot of files, I may want to search for them, or I could search across all my libraries. If I start with Adobe Stock, I might just come in and say paintbrush and hit return. So quickly what Adobe Stock is going to do is go grab a whole bunch of paintbrushes for me, something that has those keywords. Now as I'm working, you'll notice these have watermarks. I have the ability to simply download it into this library or purchase it if I know I really want to use it in my live project. But I just may want to, what can I tell you, add a little bit of paintbrushes here. So I'm going to go ahead and download that paintbrushes dripping JPEG file from Stock into this library. So it is now part of my local library, and I can come in and do all the same things that we had seen. I can press and drag it on the canvas and add it to my project. As such, as soon as I learn how to use my mouse again. All right, so I can add this guy, and it behaves like any of the other objects that I have. Search is really powerful though, so let's look at this a little bit. One thing I'm not in love with CC Libraries is I think it's afraid to load too much in the panel at one time. So if we go to the Pigeon site, the real building your first site with Pigeon. So what I did for that tutorial is rather than have a folder of files for people that are attending that tutorial session, I just created a library with a link. And I've got all of this content here. And notice how it says show 52 remaining. And then each time I click this, it's sort of doing it in paging. It's you have to kind of work to get all of the files visible. And it's kind of a pain. If I know I'm looking for a scooter image, to have to do that every time I load this panel can be difficult. So what I can do instead is in the search drop down here, I can just search within my current library, or let's say across all my libraries. ICO, I'm always creating these icon files for things like responsive mobile menus and such. And notice by just typing ICO in, it's shooting across all of my libraries and finding all instances of that. I can limit it to just my current library, and there's all the icons that I've saved out that I can access. So really nice search, works really well. Another feature that I didn't know, let's go back here to Dani Starter. I just figured this out last night by reading for comprehension, as they say. If I've got a file here, now I'm telling you more than you need to know, but I've got 30 years of using a mouse and I'm getting tendinitis in my hand. So I'm trying to learn to use a trackpad instead of a mouse. I know, more than you need to really know, especially with the sound coming and going on this recording. But it's hard for me personally to sometimes drag stuff these days. So here's my library folder. I've got this guy. I'm trying to learn how to use a trackpad, as I mentioned. And sometimes I get really close, but not quite close enough to drag into that folder. That is one way that I can add content into the library, and it's great. It will drag it over, and you can then give it a label. Another way that's really exciting is you click on the object, and then down here in the lower left-hand area, you just say add the graphic. So amazing that I can just do it that way without having to drag. Now this is where the world gets really interesting and fun. Let's go back to the full populated starter sample that 123 Muse is sharing up. I've got lots of content here, but interestingly enough, you'll notice I have Illustrator content, I have Photoshop content, and I also have Muse content. So for those of you that use libraries pretty routinely, libraries are terrific ways in the past, so built-in Muse libraries were ways that you could have things like widgets that you've configured and styled, or components that you reuse across projects. The CC library, it's our intention, and you may need to give us just a little bit more time, it's our intention to make CC libraries really a superset of libraries within Muse, so that you'll have everything you need in this new file format, including all of this file sharing capabilities. So what I've done, let's say I'm working here on my site and I jump out to another page and I want to play around with some of the content. So I'm going to create a new blank page. What I've done, or actually Chris did this for me because we collaborated on this, he went in and saved out some Muse content. So notice, let's say I'm over here again and I create a new master. And I want to just bring over some footer elements in that new master design. What Chris did is took his finished design and saved it out as components, basically. So they may have Illustrator, Photoshop content, they may be skinned and styled and configured. So I can come in, I've got a footer block here, for example. I can drag that onto the canvas and put it into place. Now this is an interesting bit here, and this is kind of the edge of my learning. So when Chris did that, he had some content that was on his directory that isn't in the library. I think the way to avoid this is to make sure that all of the elements in his assets panel that are being used in a project have also been dragged into the CC library. So I'm missing starterlogo.svg, for example. I can come into the assets panel. Let's say Chris is like, oh, my bad, let me go put it in the CC library folder. And don't do this in the background, Chris, because I no longer am sharing with you, not that I don't trust you, but he could if it was still shared up with him. And then what would happen is when I drag it on the canvas, I can come into the assets panel. Notice that I've got the starter Facebook SVG is missing. I can right click on that object and select relink. Actually, there's another way to do this. Let me see. Might be because it's a background image, but bear with me a second. Okay, so this is where we get to pick on Margie a little bit and Vadim, but as it stands right now, objects that are placed as background elements are a little more complex in Muse than just placed objects. In this instance, they were background elements. It's getting a little bit complicated in what I'm telling you, but what you can do as you work with objects is when you place them in your project, if as an asset they are not linked, you can go and link to, instead of your local directory, you can link to Creative Cloud libraries. So notice it says I've got this starter package design item here. If I right click on it, I can either relink it in general to something else on my drive, or I can relink from the Creative Cloud library. And at that point, I can come in and find that instance and relink, and it will connect that to the cloud. So what I would suggest is if you work with teams, experiment a little bit. If you have questions, let us know. But you definitely can start to get away from local drives and local content and have more shared content in the cloud using these library features. All right, I'm going to pause. We've got about 15 minutes left and see if there's anything else I can show that's on topic. We can also go off topic. I get to read chat after and see what some of the other smart people have shared in the chat. Mr. Kellett, it's okay. We're all learning a little bit on this. I'm going to bring this guy over a little bit and see what questions have been asked. Sorry, I'm just reading a little bit. So will scroll effects work with responsive Muse? We want them to do so. It is on our docket to solve. What happened is, if you think about it for a moment, a scroll effect, whether it's opacity, movement, animation, you name it, scroll effects are dependent upon an object's proximity to the top of the browser. So as I'm scrolling down on a page, when I get to a certain point in the browser, that's a trigger. That handle causes a scroll effect, like I said, an appearance of something or a movement of an object. When we move to the world of responsive, it changed because the width of the browser now determines how all the content occurs within that page. So if I bring a browser width in and objects move a lot, we need to come up with different complex metaphors, I would say, for how you define where you want a scroll effect to occur on individual breakpoints. Now, to be clear, you can have scroll effects in a responsive website if the individual page you're working on has only one breakpoint. So let's say you want to do a landing page and you want to have some scroll effects animation take place. You're welcome to do that, but that landing page needs to be a fixed width page that does not have multiple breakpoints. It can only have the first one and only breakpoint. So in essence, that page might not be responsive. It could have things like background images or slideshows and such, but it would be a fixed width page that you would have scroll effects on. It's our intention to look at how we can, if you ask me, there's some really basic scroll effects capabilities that we as users need for things like navigation. Being able to have pin navigation that appears as you scroll down on the page but isn't up in the hero area. So having some minimal scroll effects come back, I think, is critical. It's on the team's plate to solve, and we know it's important. So I can't commit to yes or when, but just know that we agree with you. Reading the next question. Yeah, so a way to insert a trigger for a composition lightbox in line with text on the page. So when you insert text, no. Part of the request for widgets is that widget developers that are extending it, people that make third-party extensions and users of the tool have asked for really being able to dig much more deeply into the widget model. And one of them would be breaking the pieces apart so that you could insert a trigger in line with text, that particular instance. That's a level of complexity that the widget model doesn't have right now. It is also something we're broadly looking at because we agree it's something that's important, but nothing to announce at this point for that kind of capability. So I would say no, you have to probably manually reposition the trigger whenever the text is changing. So when you make widgets, do you have to do anything to make them work with responsive? Chris can jump in on that if he cares to. The answer is yeah. I have seen some widgets that I have in older projects that I've opened up. For example, the table widget from Muse Themes. Interestingly enough, it's fully responsive. I do not have to change that. But if you bought widgets from third-party folks, definitely breeze by their websites and check to see if they've updated those widgets. Usually, if you've bought the widget and you have proof, you can get an update to that. And many of the widgets have been updated to work more appropriately with responsive. So definitely swing by and see. You may need to do something depending on how that widget was coded, or you may not. All right, any other questions more broadly for the tool? We can stop a little early today if we'd like to. I'm going to jump over to a little bit more interesting a page. Feedback, let me know if this session met what you were looking for. If you find tips and tricks for Creative Cloud libraries, again, it's kind of funny. I went to the Creative Cloud library page on adobe.com. It didn't even mention Muse, which surprised me. So I'm asking our documentation folks to make sure we're part of that party. There's disparate information, but please send it back to me if you learn new tricks for the cloud library feature, because I think it's pretty exciting and really robust implementation. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to do tips and tricks for building responsive sites using the existing Muse feature set. Haven't invented it yet, but I've got 2 weeks to get there. If there are sites on Site of the Day or out in the real world that you would like to try to achieve using Muse and the responsive feature set, feel free to send me an email. I will give you my email address. Do not spam me. And send me your thoughts, and we will see if we can roll that into the How Did You Do That session 2 weeks from now. Thank you, everybody, for everything you do, and we will see you in 2 weeks.